Wyoming Territory, autumn of 1883. The wind howled along the rails of the depot in Rawlins, kicking up dust like angry ghosts. Kenzie Rae stood on the edge of the weathered platform, her fingers white-knuckled around the single train ticket she had bought with the last thing she owned, her mother's silver locket. She had sold it that morning in a dry goods store run by a woman who would not meet her eyes. The locket had been the only thing left after the debts, the sickness, and the burial. Now it was gone, and she had a ticket to Cheyenne and nothing else. Kenzie was 23, alone, and too thin after weeks of sparse meals. Her chestnut hair had been neatly braided that morning, but the wind had already loosened strands. She wore a faded blue dress, hem let down twice to keep up with her height over the years. Her boots were cracked. Her eyes stayed dry, but they held the dull ache of someone who had cried until there was nothing left. The train was late. She sat down on the end of a bench and wrapped her arms around herself. Her satchel held only a change of clothes, 2 folded letters, and a worn prayer book. She had no destination beyond Cheyenne, only the hope that something better might be waiting there. She had no one left. Her father had died in a mining collapse when she was 15, her mother had passed that spring, and the ranch they once lived on had been claimed by the bank. The sound of hoofs broke through the wind. She looked up. A lone rider was dismounting across the way, tying his horse to the post outside the telegraph office. He was tall, maybe late 20s, lean like a man who worked hard and lived clean. His hat was pulled low, but not enough to hide the kind eyes beneath it. He wore a brown duster and carried no rifle, only a rope tucked at his hip. He noticed her not with curiosity, but with quiet concern, and then turned toward the depot steps. She looked away. Her hands gripped the edge of the bench. The train whistle finally called from down the line. She rose, heart pounding. She reached into her satchel, pulled out the ticket, and stepped toward the edge of the platform. But her foot slipped sideways on loose gravel, and she staggered. Her ankle twisted hard. She cried out and crumpled to the wood planks, sharp pain flashing through her leg. "Miss," the voice was deep and soft. She tried to get up, but the pain in her ankle was too sharp. The man knelt beside her. "I saw. Here, let me help." He slid one arm under her back and the other under her knees and lifted her as if she weighed no more than a sack of flour. "I need to," she started, gesturing toward the train that had just come into view around the bend. "You will not make it up those steps like this," he said gently. "Let us get you sat down for a minute." She wanted to argue, but the pain was too much. He carried her to the bench like it was nothing, then knelt to examine her ankle. His hands were strong, but his touch was careful. "Not broken," he said, "but you should not put weight on it for a day or two." "I cannot wait," she whispered, blinking fast. "I sold the only thing I had for that ticket. I have no one else. If I miss that train, I have nothing." He looked up at her, and something in his eyes shifted. Not pity, not judgment, understanding. He stood slowly and took off his hat. "Name is Lawson Kade," he said. "I got a small spread just north of town. Horses, mostly. No family. Not much to offer, but it's warm and dry. Let me help you get back on your feet. Just for a few days." Kenzie looked past him to the train. The conductor was calling final boarding. "You do not even know me," she said. "I know you need help. That is enough for me." Something in his voice settled the storm inside her. She watched the train pull away, her ticket crumpled in her hand. The weight of that choice landed hard, but so did the quiet steadiness of the man in front of her. She nodded. He smiled, small and quiet. "All right then. Let us get you to the wagon." Lawson's ranch sat a good hour's ride from the depot. He drove the buckboard himself, keeping the pace slow so she would not jostle too much. The trail rolled wide and open, passing through golden fields and clusters of aspen. Kenzie sat wrapped in a wool blanket, her ankle propped and packed with cool cloth. The wind was softer out here, carrying the scent of dry grass and pine. "I can cook," Kenzie said after a long silence. Lawson glanced at her. "You do not owe me anything. I would feel better if I could earn my keep." He nodded once. "Then I will let you." By the time they reached the ranch, the sun had started to dip. The house was small but tidy, one room, clean porch, smoke rising from the chimney. There was a barn nearby and a paddock with 2 horses grazing. A dog barked once, then wagged its tail when it saw Lawson. He carried her from the wagon like it was nothing. She felt awkward in his arms, but also oddly safe. He set her on a chair near the fireplace while he started a stew and poured her water. They did not speak much that first night. He cooked, she watched the fire. When he handed her a bowl, their fingers touched. "I will sleep in the barn," he said, nodding toward the door. "You take the bed. It is warmer in here." She opened her mouth to argue, but he raised a hand. "I will be fine. I have slept colder places than this." It was the first time she smiled since spring. "Thank you, Lawson." He tipped his head. "You are welcome, Kenzie." 3 days passed. Her ankle healed faster than she expected, thanks to rest and Lawson's quiet care. He brought her water, hauled wood, let her sit outside in the sun when it was warm enough. She cooked for him, mended one of his shirts, swept the porch when she could limp to it. He never asked questions, but one night, as they sat on the steps and watched the stars, she spoke. "My mother died in May. Fever. We had nothing left after. I sold the ranch to cover the doctor's debts. The locket was the only thing I kept. I thought maybe Cheyenne would be better." He nodded, not speaking. "I am sorry I lost the ticket," she whispered. "I am not," he said. She looked at him. "If you had not, I would not have met you." Her breath caught in her chest. He stood then, offering his hand. She took it and he helped her up, slow and gentle. That night she slept sounder than she had in months. And in the barn, Lawson lay awake longer than usual, thinking about the way her eyes looked in the firelight. The ground had hardened beneath the first frost. Kenzie stood on the porch with a cane Lawson had fashioned from pine, its bark smoothed down with a knife and some patience. Her ankle bore weight now, though not without a twinge if she moved too fast. She watched him in the paddock, his coat slung over the fence post, sleeves rolled, arms working steady as he ran a curry comb over the bay gelding. A pair of geese passed high overhead, bound south. She followed their path until they vanished into the clouds. "You always this quiet, or just around strangers?" she asked once he came up for water, his hair damp with sweat and the morning sun catching the dust on his shoulders. Lawson drank deep before answering. "Never had much use for chatter. Most things worth saying don't take many words." Kenzie studied him, her hand resting on the porch railing. "And what about things not easy to say?" He looked at her, not evasive, but weighing something. "Those take time." She nodded and didn't press. Instead, she turned back inside and began slicing turnips for a midday meal. There was something in the rhythm of the blade against the board, the scent of onions warming in the skillet, that steadied her. She had no right to feel settled here, not after so short a span. But the days had begun to thread together in a way that felt rooted. That afternoon, Lawson brought in a bundle of fence posts. "Elk pushed through the northeast line," he said as he set the tools by the door. "I'll ride out and mend it before dusk." "I'll come," she said, already reaching for her shawl. He hesitated, still favoring that leg. "I can sit on a stump and hand you nails." His mouth turned, not in amusement, but in something softer. "All right." They rode out in silence, her on the smaller roan mare he'd brought in from the barn that morning, him beside her on the gelding. The trail wound through open grassland, then sloped toward a long line of split-rail fencing that ran along a shallow draw. Broken posts leaned where the animals had come through, the wire slack and trailing. Kenzie dismounted carefully, easing herself down with care. She found a flat rock and sat, the hammer and nails in a sack at her side. Lawson worked without fuss, setting new posts with purpose. Now and then he held out a hand, and she passed him what he needed. The sun dipped lower, casting long shadows across the field. "You ever think about leaving?" she asked, her voice low against the hush of the wind. He drove a nail home before answering. "Sometimes, but I've put too much into this land to walk away from it. Even if there's nothing waiting for you here?" He straightened and looked at her. "There is now." She held his gaze, heart stumbling a little. The wind rifled his shirt sleeves, caught a strand of her hair and tugged it free. Neither of them looked away. He turned back to the fence and finished the last post. They rode back slower than they'd come. The light had gone gold. The sky streaked rose and amber. When they reached the house, he helped her down, then paused as she steadied herself. "You're not just passing through anymore, are you?" he asked. She shook her head. "I thought I was, but I was wrong." Lawson nodded once, then stepped aside so she could pass. His hand brushed her back, not by accident, not bold, just steady and sure. That night, she lit the oil lamp while he cleaned his boots by the door. The room was warm, scented with wood smoke and the stew she'd set to simmer before they'd left. She set 2 bowls on the table and sat across from him. As they ate, she reached into her satchel, pulled out a folded piece of paper, and laid it between them. "My father wrote this before he died," she said. "Said I should keep it until I found a place worth calling home." Lawson wiped his hands and unfolded the page slowly. It was a deed and signed, unclaimed, but with her name written in her father's hand and a single line at the bottom: "For the land she'll know is hers when she finds it." She watched him read, her fingers wound tight together. "I think I've found it," she said, voice clear. Lawson looked at her, and this time, the silence wasn't heavy. It was full. He reached across the table, took her hand gently in his. "Then stay," he said. "Not as a guest, as mine." Her lips parted, breath catching, but no words came. So she nodded, and that was enough. Outside, the wind carried the scent of snow. Inside, the fire crackled low, and 2 hands stayed joined across a worn wooden table. The first snow came overnight, blanketing the hills in a hush that made every sound feel sharper. Kenzie woke to the quiet creak of the cabin roof settling under the weight, the faint shuffle of Lawson pulling on his boots near the hearth. She lay still, watching his silhouette move through the soft blue light filtering through the frosted window pane. He didn't notice her eyes open until he bent to stoke the fire. She sat up slowly, blanket falling from her shoulders. "I'll take the wash down to the creek later," she said, voice hoarse from sleep. Lawson looked over his shoulder. "The creek's froze over. You'll break your back swinging an axe through that ice." "I don't mind the work." He straightened, brushing ash from his hands. "I know you don't. But this morning, the stove's enough for warming water. I'll fetch a bucket. You can stay in where it's dry." Kenzie reached for her shawl, wrapping it tight. "I'd rather go with you." Lawson didn't argue. He only handed her his heavier coat before stepping outside. They walked the short slope behind the barn where the spring-fed trough still ran slow under a crust of ice. He broke it with the blunt end of a hatchet and dipped the pail in, steam rising around his arm. Kenzie stood beside him, breath coming in pale clouds, watching the way the snow clung to the fence rails and curled around the hoofprints leading back up the hill. "You ever think about what it means, being needed?" she asked. Lawson set the full bucket down and looked at her. "You mean by someone else?" She nodded. He glanced toward the barn. "A horse knows who feeds it, who tends its cuts, and walks it through a storm. That isn't love, but it's close." Her lips parted, startled by the honesty of the answer. "I suppose I've never known the difference before," she said. Lawson took a slow breath. "Then maybe we figure it out together." They walked back in silence, the bucket swinging gently between them. Inside, she heated the water, and he pulled a folded slip of canvas from behind the door. "I've got something you ought to see," he said, setting it on the table. The canvas unfurled into a map, faded lines, hand-sketched boundaries, notes scribbled in the margins. "My father started this before he passed. He wanted to breed Mustangs on open land beyond the ridge. Never got the chance." Lawson tapped a line near the bottom edge. "But I've been riding out there these past few springs, checking the grazing. There's enough space for a dozen head." Kenzie leaned in, tracing the ink with her fingertip. "You mean to carry on what he started?" He nodded. She hesitated, then looked up at him. "Would you want someone beside you when you do it?" Lawson folded the map slowly, careful not to crease the corners. "Not just someone." Her breath caught. He stepped closer, letting the moment stretch between them. "You came here with nothing," he said, voice low. "But you brought more than you know." Her hand found his, fingers curling into his palm. Then let me stay. Not just in your home. His grip tightened, steady and sure. You already have. That night, they sat by the fire again, the snow ticking softly against the window. He read aloud from a dog-eared almanac while she mended a frayed saddle blanket. No declarations passed between them, only the quiet threading of lives now woven together. Outside, the wind eased. Inside, the warmth held. By late November, the snow had deepened into drifts along the north side of the barn, and the sky stayed the color of pewter most days. The stillness of winter had settled in, the kind that muffled sound and slowed all things to a quieter rhythm. Kenzie had taken to rising before dawn, lighting the stove while Lawson brought in water or checked the traps he'd set near the tree line. This morning, she stood at the kitchen table, scraping flour into a bowl with calloused fingers, sleeves rolled to her elbows. Her hair was pinned up loosely, a few wisps clinging to her cheek where the heat from the stove had warmed her skin. Lawson came in with the cold still clinging to his coat. His hat dusted white. "Snared a rabbit," he said, setting the bundle on the chopping block. Tracks were light, might be leaner pickings soon. Kenzie nodded, brushing her hands clean. "I can stretch what we've got. There's still dried beans and the last of the apples in the root cellar. I was thinking to make a pie with the ones that haven't gone soft." Lawson glanced at her, then at the window where snow tapped against the glass. "That'd be good. My mother used to make a pie when the weather locked us in. Said it kept a home feeling like one." Kenzie didn't answer right away. She placed the dough aside to rest and leaned her hip against the table. What kind of woman was she? He unbuttoned his coat, hung it on the peg, then sat by the fire to warm his hands. She could read the sky like a ledger. Knew when the cattle would drop or when the creek would rise. She'd hum when she mended shirts, never loud, just quiet, like she was telling herself a story no one else could hear. Kenzie turned back to the table, her voice low. "You favor her, then?" Lawson looked up. "I try." She didn't say more, but there was something in the way her fingers moved, measured and clean, that said she understood what it meant to carry the memory of someone by living as they would have. Later that day, while the pie cooled on the windowsill and the afternoon fell heavy with silence, Lawson came in with a bundle of wood and a slip of paper folded into his shirt pocket. "Rode into town before sunrise," he said, setting the wood by the stove. "Had to post a letter with the land office." Kenzie lifted her head from the blanket she was stitching. "You didn't say you were going. Didn't want to wake you. And I didn't know what I'd find." He pulled the paper from his pocket and laid it on the table. She stepped closer, her eyes scanning the ink. "You filed for the parcel west of the ridge." He nodded. "It's ours now, if we want it." Kenzie touched the page, her fingers light. "You mean to build out there?" "Not in the cold. But spring's only a season away. There's water, shelter, good grazing. Enough space to start something that's ours from the ground up." She looked at him, brows drawn. "And you want me there? Not just for mending or keeping house." "No," he stepped closer, his voice even. "I want you there because no place feels right without you in it." The wind whistled outside then, soft against the eaves, and she felt the weight of that moment settle around her like a second skin. Kenzie reached up, resting her hand against his chest, just over the spot where the letter had been tucked. "You're asking me to stay for good." "I'm not asking," he said gently. "I'm offering you the same thing you brought here, something steady, something real." She stood there a long time, watching the fire shift in the stove, then nodded once. "I'll help you build it." Lawson leaned in and pressed his forehead to hers. Not rushed, not eager, just present. Her breath caught, and for the first time in what felt like years, it didn't hurt to hope. That night, they ate the pie by lamplight, the map between them again, this time with their initials written in pencil on the bottom corner. The wind carried on outside, but inside, the house held firm, and between them, a life had begun to take shape, quiet, certain, and entirely their own. By early March, the thaw had begun to creep in, quiet and slow. The snow melted in rivulets down the hillsides, and the pasture behind the house turned to soft earth dotted with green shoots. Kenzie stood in the doorway, apron dusted with flour, watching a pair of crows tug at last year's corn husks out near the fence line. The air held a different weight now, not just the promise of spring, but of what they were building day by day. Lawson came in from the barn, his shirt damp at the collar, a faint scrape on his knuckle from the new harness buckle he'd been working to repair. "They mare through her shoe," he said, wiping his hands on a rag. "I'll ride into town before week's end, see if the Smith's back from his sister's." Kenzie nodded, setting a kettle on the stove. "Take the roan. She moves easier on that rocky stretch." He glanced toward the table where several folded papers lay, lists of supplies, a sketch of the new lean-to, names of neighbors who'd agreed to lend hands when the weather firmed up. "You've been planning without me," he said, nodding toward the papers. "I've been preparing," she corrected. "We're not going to build a life on good intentions alone." Lawson set the rag down, stepping closer. "You always think 3 steps ahead?" "When I can." She turned, facing him fully. "It's how I survived long enough to get here." He reached out, brushing a stray curl from her brow. "You're not surviving anymore." She held his wrist, her voice steady. "No, I'm not." That afternoon, they walked the length of the ridge, boots sinking softly into the wet soil. The patch of land they had claimed together stretched long and uneven, but the view from the top was wide valley to the west, timberline to the east, and the cold sparkle of a stream twisting through the bottom like a ribbon of glass. Kenzie dropped to one knee, pressing her palm to the earth. "Topsoil's thin here. We'll need to bring in compost from the lower pasture if we want a kitchen garden." Lawson crouched beside her. "I can haul it in by wagon. You just tell me where it goes." She looked up at him, shading her eyes. "You ever picture anything past this?" He didn't answer right away. Then, "I picture you barefoot on the porch come summer, basket full of beans. I picture driving fence posts while you curse the heat from the shade. I picture you beside me every night until the frost comes back." Her throat tightened. "That's not a small thing to promise. I don't make small promises." The wind lifted, carrying the scent of wet sage. She leaned into him, pressing her cheek to the rough wool of his coat. He held her there, arms wrapped around her shoulders, neither of them speaking. They didn't need to. By the time they returned to the cabin, the light had dipped low, turning the snowmelt pools to gold. Lawson lit the lamp while Kenzie set bread dough to rise. They moved easily around one another, not out of habit but belonging. As they sat down to eat, Lawson reached into his coat pocket and placed a small wrapped bundle beside her plate. She looked at him, puzzled. "Go on," he said. Inside was a chain of braided horsehair, chestnut and black, and a silver ring, smooth and plain, threaded through the center. "I shaped the band from the bit ring off my father's bridle," he said. "Didn't want something bought from a case?" Kenzie's hands trembled slightly as she picked it up. "You made this. I wanted to give you something that came from here. From me. If you'll have it." Her eyes shone, but she didn't cry. She slipped the ring onto her finger, then took his hand in both of hers. "I will." He leaned forward, resting his forehead against hers, their breath mingling between them. "Then this is it. You and me. All the way." Kenzie smiled, her voice barely above a whisper. "All the way." That spring, they built the lean-to on the ridge. Neighbors came with planks and nails, a widow from downriver brought wildflower seeds, and a rancher's boy helped dig the posts for the corral. Kenzie planted beans and onions, Lawson fenced in the grazing field, and together they raised a home that bore their hands in every board and stone. By midsummer, the porch held a rocking chair and a row of drying herbs. The barn smelled of hay and horses, and the kitchen always carried the scent of bread or stew or pie cooling near the window. They never spoke of the lives they'd left behind, not out of avoidance, but because the one they'd built together was full enough. In the evenings, they sat side by side on the porch, hands intertwined, dogs curled at their feet, and nothing left unspoken between them. And when the first frost came again, it found them still there, warm in their own house, fire crackling, heart steady, and deeply, wholly in love.